we're going to be looking at today. Ethical standards is probably the first thing to make sure we talk about because the state had come out with a new set of standards to help govern people who provide services for human trafficking. I even don't like to say the word victims or survivors, and I'm going to get to that later why. But now we have these standards that are put into place for us to follow in our way of being able to provide these services. Okay. The basic expectations, though, for services, and this is across the board, this is just not mental health, is to empower the person in front of us. So being able to listen to their voice and their perspective, not to go in with any assumptions. One young lady that I met with this week had actually said to me, I'm in no book. You can't learn from a book what I have. The last 10 people you saw have nothing to do with me. You know, you don't know my story. I'm not here to relate to anybody. I'm here to be able to have my therapy and my treatment. So, just keep that in mind, that we can't go in with any assumptions because we've worked with this person or that person or this person every day. We have to have that blank slate and be open to what might be in front of us. We want to be non-discriminatory, and there's lots of different components to that that we're going to talk about. We want to be victim-centered, which is more than what most people discuss when we talk about victim-centered. Confidential, and how to discuss what is going to be shared information, what is not going to be shared information, how to prepare the person you're working with for information that has to be shared so they can expect how it's going to be shared, and their empowerment process in that process of sharing. So you want to make sure they're involved through that whole area, and to be trauma-informed. Now, there's been a lot of trainings on trauma-informed care, and it does scratch the surface of important things we need to do. However, with complex trauma, a lot of that is very different, and there's a lot more involved. So being that we're all here because we want to help people that have experienced human trafficking, that's complex trauma. And we want to know what to do and beyond the basic trauma-informed things we might have learned about before. Okay. So non-discriminatory. All right, so you've all heard this term before. People can be discriminated with age, race, color, sexuality, religion, gender, national origin, and many, many, many other complex things. It could be just the judgment of what they're wearing. Okay? So you never know what process you're going to be invited into with somebody that has experienced human trafficking. Oh, thank you. So you want to get the information from each of these components, but make sure that the way that you're getting the information is very neutral, and it's where, an example I can say for religion, I had met with somebody that I asked the question, which is on all our paperwork, about spiritual and religious practices, strengths and weaknesses, where we just list what those are. Well, the person's shoulders went up. Okay, are they going to preach to me? What's going on? That I could just see it in her body. And so I explained to her, we're not going to discuss your spirituality and religion, but this is a safe space if you choose to. And we want to know what your beliefs are, so we're respectful of them. Part of the age, we want to know what that is. Sometimes you might not get the true age at first. The race and color. Don't assume by looking at somebody what their race is. Somebody could look like they might fit into one race category, but it actually be something very different with what their culture and their makeup is. And asking those questions is actually something that you might feel a little uncomfortable about to start with, but it's so appreciated by the person. They're like, thank you for just not making an assumption. Because, where I come from, my people, that's very important to me. and then they get to talk about who they are. Same thing with gender and sexuality. You don't want to make assumptions by saying words like boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife, or you don't want to do that because we just don't want to make any assumption at all. I call it having clean language. So it's language that's very neutral, that doesn't have any definitions whatsoever, so that way the person that you're with can make those definitions for you, and you follow that in the process of being there for them. And it is hard. I know it might sound like I'm saying it's easy. It's not. You have to really be attentive and have that active listening to be able to do that. And if you don't understand something, ask. I think the first time, and this will actually be a joke, because it was funny, that the first time I had met a young lady that told me that she was pansexual. I didn't know what that meant, right? So I asked her, I said, I'm still learning. Can you explain to me what pansexual looks like? She's like, well, you know that band Skillet? I was like, yeah. She's like, I pretty much do all of them. It's like, oh, that's a joke. And then she was able to define that, pansexual is meaning that, you are attracted to the internal sense of the person, not about what the outward body might look like. So it's not definitive on the outward body appearance. But you learn as you go. And it's okay to be human, say, please help me understand what that is. I want to make sure that I just don't skip over that. I know what you're talking about. All right. Victim-centered. So we've talked about victim-centered in lots of different trainings that I've been to. And pretty much the whole gist of it is making sure that it's about them. That everything that we do is with them considered. All right? And that can be hard, depending on what kind of provider you are. Because it might be like, well, my funding source says I have to do this, right? Such as, for me, I have to bill Medicaid sometimes. And Medicaid says I need this from the person at the first visit. That might not be what I can get from this person the first visit, because I would be crossing so many of their boundaries that I have not earned the right to cross. So I have to make the decision within my practice. We just won't bill that until we get all that information. So does that mean I'm going to be providing some things for free? Yeah. But what's important, the difference or the dollar? That's what our practice is at. So making sure that what you're able to do to make sure that you're providing for them and their needs are first be considered. Confidential, you all know this. But the biggest thing that I want to talk about with this is that when I'm working with clients, no matter their background, not only do I just explain confidentiality to them, but I tell them what it would look like if their confidentiality has to be broken. So I go into explanations like, all right, well, if I hear something that you might say, or that you tell me something that has been done, or you know about, that safety is important, that comes up before everything else. I will discuss that with you. Then you and I will create the best way for you, for me to share this information. I have to share it. I have to share it with these select people because of safety or whatever. However, I empower them to be part of that process. Would you like to be there when I talk to them? Would you like me to have them in the room with us? Would you like me to call you after I'm done talking with them, let you know how it went? Processing that piece. A lot of people don't do that. They just let them know up front, hey, if you say this, this, or this, confidentiality's out the window, and then people feel very betrayed when confidentiality is having to be broken. Okay. Exploitation I have on there as well, which is, by definition, the action or fact of treating someone unfairly in order to benefit from their work, the action of making use of and benefiting from resources. I see a lot of this being done accidentally. I say it's accidentally because I want to give the best, best foot forward and best assumptions made of other people. But I've gone to different events for different agencies that provide services for people that have experienced human trafficking, and I've seen lines get crossed that looked very much like what the trafficker might have done. Such as, I've walked into a fundraiser, and I see these beautiful girls with these frou-frou gowns walking around with baskets. Would you like to make a donation? Would you like to make a donation? Help us be able to have more beds, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, look at how beautiful they are. They're in these, almost pageant gowns. I'm like, wow, really fancy. To learn a little bit later, when the executive director stands up, that, oh, these ladies are our clients. Oh, you're making them walk around and ask for money? I'm like, wait a minute. So things like that are being done, but the executive director did not mean any harm to the girls, right? She was trying to show success that they had achieved in this event. However, that's so inappropriate. Also having some people talk, like I've had people that I've worked with that have been success stories that have said, hey, if you want me to come with you to one of your trainings and talk about how you helped me, I'll come. I want to help. I want other people to know about what you're doing so other people can get helped. No, thank you. And if there's any certain things you want me to say, I'll be glad to put it as a part of my presentation to share, but I can't name you and I can't give any information in what you share that can identify you because, not because I don't value you and your words and your advice, but because I value you so much that probably more than you value yourself at this point. And you don't realize the possible consequences. So a lack of self-preservation is one thing that a lot of people that have experienced human trafficking and other complex traumas share, have that in common. So sometimes they just want to help and please and give, once they get to that point, and you can't step into that. All right, so now being complex trauma informed, more than just trauma informed, I gave a definition just to let you understand that it's not just yourself, it's a whole organizational structure has to be set up this way. So you have to really look at even your paperwork, your office space, how you present yourself and the language that you use off paper and on paper is really crucial. You want to understand the difference between being trauma-informed and just being nice. Yes, you need to be nice, but that's not good enough, being nice. And you want to make sure you're auditing your work constantly. And maybe have another set of eyes within your agency to look to see like, oh, maybe that shouldn't be there. Maybe we need to clean that language up a little bit more in this way to offer more protection. Components of being trauma-informed is something we're going to look at here in the next couple slides. But I wanted to, I have some speaker notes that I wanted to make sure I reviewed for you. So first of all, thinking to yourself, what you're bringing in and why you're there. So why are you, is this not on the, oh, okay, no, this is the right one. So why are you doing this work? Are you here to try to save people? Are you here to be a hero? To pat yourself on the back? To be able to tell your parents, aren't you proud of me? I'm doing this, right? We want to make sure that we are completely genuine and aware of why we're doing this work and making sure that that is genuine when we are doing the work. When you do a trauma audit within your agency, you want to really look at the practice, the policies that are sensitive to trauma, its impact on the client and the families of the client, and how it may affect the process of treatment, whatever that might look like in whatever your setting is. Okay? Let me go to this one because I can't see all of it. So I was going to give you some examples of the environment and how to make an environment trauma-informed. And I was sharing just before coming here that I was asked, is this the final slide? So we can go ahead and upload it and get it ready. This was yesterday. I think I sent it finally because I'm constantly learning and constantly getting new information. So I had a young lady this past week that I had worked with that taught me something that I didn't have on here yet, but it was something else about the environment. So I'm going to try to remember to add that. I'm going to read the rest of it. So things like the noise level, you want to consider that. The lighting and the temperature, consider if that's comfortable. Cleanliness, you want it to be clean but not sterile looking. That's like a fine line. The traffic, like who's coming in and out of that space. The waiting areas, is there possibly a separate area that they could be brought to wait instead of a public, a lot of people type waiting area? See, signage, safety. For safety, one thing that I do is I don't advertise just out in the blue, like, hey, I work with a lot of victims of human trafficking, because as they see people walking in and out my office, that's not safe for those people. Okay, so I try to even consider how I'm putting myself out there. Response times. So you want to be on time for the meeting. That's the first thing. Like a lot of people that I've worked with have said, I've gone to this appointment and they were 25 minutes late. And they said they were sorry, but I didn't really feel like they were sorry because, they just kept moving off past their sorry, and so they didn't show it. So just make sure you understand, like sometimes things happen and you can't prevent things from happening all the time, but be mindful of how that's important. Speaking directly to the person. So I've had some people come to me and say, last person I met with was just staring at the computer and speaking out over the computer, and I don't even know if they looked at me. That made them feel very uncomfortable, and like they didn't matter, and they weren't even there. They weren't a person. I had one person tell me something that was so profound, and that's where I'm learning most of this. Isn't from books, it's from people I work with. That she said, I tried to ask for help when I was little. I talked to people about what was going on when I was little, and I wasn't heard. So if I'm not going to be heard, well, darn it, I'm going to be seen. And she would cause a scene in every environment that she was in because she wanted to be seen and heard. And that's one thing that, we might forget. It's like, well, this person might look like they're having a bad attitude or bad behavior, but they're just mad. They're just defeated. And we just have to hear that in their behavior and what's going on so we can help change that, get a better rapport going. Appropriate transparency. So as a mental health provider, I know I was trained in college that if a client that I'm working with says something like, well, do you have children? You're supposed to respond by the book by saying something like, well, it's interesting you're curious if I have children. Why does that matter to you? And turn it back to them. Somebody with complex trauma is going to be like, oh, no. So what I recommend is sharing just that little bit of appropriate information, such as, I do have children. I have 3 young men that are grown. How about you? Do you have children? Just turn it back as quick as you can. But to be genuine and be real, and hear their questions and respect them enough to answer them to a certain point, But you don't want to be like, oh yeah, my oldest is this one's my oldest, he's this age, and this one's this age, and he's doing this, and my youngest is in Germany for the Air Force, and blah, 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 blah. They don't need to know all that. Okay, so just that little tiny bit of information just to help you connect. They want to connect. Address the person by their name, but you don't want to do that until you know what name they want to be referred to as. Okay, so not what's on the paper from the referral source. That's one of the first questions, like, well, okay, I have this name spelled this way, blah, 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 blah. You know, how would you prefer me to refer to you? Ask that. Okay, policies and practices, what questions have to be asked versus what can wait. So another thing is, like, we network with a lot of other agencies and providers. If they have already asked these questions, I'm not going to ask the same questions. I'm going to ask for a release to be able to have that information. And then if that person gives me more, I can add to what I learned and everything like that. But you don't want to ask the same questions over and over and over again. You're like, oh my gosh, I've answered this already. And your nonverbal body language. So one thing that I find is helpful is, instead of sitting directly across from somebody that has experienced complex trauma, sitting just a little bit to the side. So, like if Kendra was sitting across from me like this, right, she would feel a power differential of either feeling forced to make eye contact with me or want to completely avoid eye contact with me. But that's just something really small that I can do, is step over here and put my chair sideways so she can look this way, she can look that way, or she can choose to look me in the eye. All right? So it just gives them a little bit more space. So even little things like that are really powerful because they demonstrate authority. And the thing that I remembered, the thing that the young lady taught me this week that was really by accident, and a little bit backstory was, I had got a new frame for my diploma, for my PhD, and I was going to redo my wall of all my certificates and everything behind my desk. So all of them were down and like put different places because, for mental health, you have to have them posted somewhere. And she actually said to me, she's like, I'm so glad that as I'm sitting here across from you on your desk, I'm not having to stare at all these achievements you've made, and as a reminder that you're better than me. It's like, well, I'm not better than you. Yes, I've gone to school and have these degrees, but wow, I'm not putting those up on that wall. I'm going to find a different spot. I never thought of that. Okay? So you might just have to listen and to people and and make the changes that you can make. Now again, I said I have to post it somewhere according to all the insurance contracts I have, but I can post it like on a hallway wall or something like that, and if somebody asks to see it, oh, it's out there. That's not the important part of why I'm here. Yes, I have the training to be here, but it's not like me against you and not authority. And how you dress your clothes, like what you wear. Sometimes you have to dress up, right? Because of whatever expectations you have. However, if you're able to dress down just even a little bit, that's really helpful. I'm usually in jeans and some like very generic t-shirt, sneakers, or cowboy boots, depending if we're doing horse time or not. Just because, anything that they can see in me to set me different and above them is going to affect the relationship. I don't wear a badge. Okay, we have badges, but they're kept in our purse. So we can pull it out when it's needed. Now, you might be in a setting where you can't do that, but maybe there's a way to make it not as loud, like, look at my initials, look at my acronyms, I am this, I have achieved this. People that have experienced complex trauma, that really makes it feel like they're going to be judged for not being good enough for you. Okay. I think that was all on this one. Here, I'll give it back so you can turn them for me. Okay, so what is complex trauma? It could be something developmental, something that has occurred over somebody's lifespan. So this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. This gentleman that I worked with had an aha moment last week during our session, because he's like, you know, the world's such a scary place. I've been mugged by gunpoint 2 times. I've had something put in my drink one time that ended up in the wrong side of Charlotte, and I didn't know where I was. And then this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and all these other massive traumas. And then we got to understand that when he was little, he grew up in a neighborhood that was very crime-filled. There was lots of things happening all the time that were like right outside his window. So he was desensitized to those red flags. So he didn't recognize this is unsafe territory. Maybe I shouldn't go to Blockbuster when there's no lights out, you know, above and it's dark, and maybe I shouldn't put the VHS tape in the Blockbuster container, you know, right now. Maybe I should wait till the morning and drop it off. He didn't have that because he's been desensitized from his experiences. So it could be developmental. It could be caused from all different kinds of trauma. Trauma is subjective. What's traumatic for this person might not be traumatic for this person. I have a lesson that I actually learned one time. A lady came to see me because she heard I specialized in complex trauma. And it was very difficult but humbling to be able to work with her, because her trauma was so, I hate to say simple, compared to what I usually work with, that I had to remember, like, this is a big deal. This is big to her, and I had to be there. When we went to the Psychiatric Nurses Association last week, Kendra and I spoke there, and it was a monsoon driving into Charlotte in the dark. I was like this. That was trauma for me, you know, being able to do that. However, for somebody else, no problem. It might be a trauma being back in Stanley County when you have to drive 20 miles to get to a Walmart. Okay, so just, who knows? That's very big minds, obviously, but just as an example that trauma is subjective. You don't want to tell somebody that they've experienced a trauma when you hear what they've experienced, because they might think that's, no, that wasn't it. I was even told yesterday by somebody that I was working with, she said, you know, you might think that being punched in the head until I blacked out was my most traumatic event with that relationship. However, it was him telling me that I was no good, that him telling me that he was going to hurt my children. That was the most traumatic part of it. So don't define it for them. The single incident traumas versus complex traumas is important to understand the differences of that. They need different treatment. They need different treatment from person to person, as well as mental health type treatment. So don't go for the keyword trauma means this by evidence, trauma means this by evidence. No, go by the person, okay? All right, so looking at the long-term trauma impact, this is from the ACEs study. I just put it in here for you just to reflect on. We're not going to talk too much about it, but it's just making sure that all of these levels are considered when we're working with somebody. They need to be considered in our referral sources, like when we are making connections for the person. We need to consider educational deprivation that might have occurred, cognitive outcomes that the person might be experiencing, physical health problems, emotional well-being, behavioral outcomes, and spiritual responses. We need to consider all of it when we are working with somebody, because the variety of the impacts is massive in each of these domains. The effects of complex trauma. There's a lot, and I could add more every time that I work with somebody. But some of the key common things that I've seen, I wanted to list for you. So attachment and relationship problems I put as first, because that's going to be your biggest obstacle to helping the person. So recognizing that you don't have any right to demand for them to trust you. You have to earn it. And recognizing that first is important. Your degree doesn't mean that they should trust you, right? The fact that you've been in the field for 20 years doesn't mean that they should trust you. They need to trust you on their own set of decisions. Some of the problems that you might see with attachment with somebody with you, they could be really clingy, right? Or they could be oppositional towards you, distrustful, overly compliant and pleasing. They could be defensive with things that they come out with, or controlling. They might really be fighting for control in their life because they haven't had that. And darn it, everyone deserves to have some control. Physical health, you want to consider the stress chemicals that may have damaged other aspects of their health. So is there heart conditions? Okay. Sometimes blood pressure. The change of the structure of the brain and the body that trauma has induced. Physiological, motoric, and medical problems are all things that might have happened. Emotional dysregulation, they might shut down or be overactive with their emotions. Their emotions might go all over the place. One young lady that I worked with had told me that one thing I said to her was probably the most profound. And 3 years ago, I said it one time, and she came and said it to me, about a month ago. She's like, well, when I'm interviewed, because she was being interviewed, when I'm interviewed, I want to make sure I tell them something you shared with me when you first started working with me. I was like, what was that? That was 3 years ago. And she said that the healing process from trauma is not linear. That it might go like this. You might have ups, you might have downs, you might have turns, you might have divisions, right? And we have to keep that in mind, and she did. So when she had those downs, she knew there was an up coming. When she had those turns and divisions, she was a little bit more prepared. So she was able to navigate those roads a little bit more in healthy ways. Okay, I want to make sure I look at the other ones. Behavioral problems, reenactment of trauma, self-harm, angry outbursts, non-compliance are some things you might see. Cognitive area, you might see delays, confusion, dissociation, depersonalization. Dissociation is probably the biggest obstacle that I've heard that people have experienced, that others, like in different other agencies, like law enforcement or whatever, might not really understand, because they might just look like they don't care, right? Or it doesn't seem to bother them. That flatness. And, like, well, I don't know if they were really a victim. They're not acting like a victim, right? So that's something just to keep in mind, that a dissociated state is like a neurological shutdown. That is because it's too much. And our brain does that sometimes when there's just been too much. And I've had to help the people I work with understand that through treatment, if they're in a dissociation spot, when they start with me, I'm like, okay, it's going to sound weird, but if you find yourself starting to cry or starting to have emotional outbursts, you're getting better. I'm like, what? I'm kind of controlled right now. It's like, yes, but we need to feel it before we can heal it. So we have to get them past that. I mentioned already the self-preservation, which is the natural protection of yourself from harm. A lot of people that have experienced complex trauma just don't have that. So we have to help them learn how to instill that in their lives. Educational deprivation, sometimes they may have been listed as homeschooled because they were being trafficked, and they didn't want, maybe their trafficker was their parent, or another caregiver, and they didn't want the school to have eyes on the child. So maybe this child grew up without having formal education or any real education. So we have to consider that. And that, especially like with labor trafficking, we see that a lot. With sex trafficking, I see it a little bit when it's been family members that have trafficked the victim. Spiritual responses, anger directed toward God, disbelief that God has not protected them, withdrawal from religious services. Some immediately turn to God and begin attending services for the first time. They may project anger towards clergy and the faith community. Some might recite prayers and hymns. It's like, you never know. And as far as arranging for special services, to help the anguish resulting from trauma, I have a couple more things, things to say about this, which is probably the most sensitive part of these trainings, is because I like to make sure everyone understands that I'm not speaking defensiveness about spirituality and religion because I don't believe it, because I am a faithful person, which is why I do this work. I feel led to do this work. However, the people that come into me, I have to be mindful of where they are, and I can't push my beliefs onto them, because then I'll just be controlling and power again. But here's some mistakes that I've heard about from some of the people I've worked with. Even though many programs that address the needs of human trafficking are faith-based, which we do have a lot of amazing programs in our area that are faith-based, it's crucial that religious practices are not pushed, directly or indirectly, as due to the responses to trauma that I mentioned, this may cause the individual to respond negatively or sometimes even push them into crisis mode. Only discuss religion and spirituality if they bring it into the conversation, and even then, do not project your beliefs onto them. Instead, be an example of positivity and acceptance, which is faith-driven behaviors. I'm going to share a couple things that clients have told me that they've experienced from other places that they've been to. And these things have not been done for the purpose of causing harm. I want to make sure that that's known, that I really believe that the best interest of the person was there. It was just misdirected, okay? So were policies and procedures that were in place that maybe were based on religious practices. For example, one client I had attempted suicide, as she was told that if she was still experiencing anxiety, it was because she wasn't praying hard enough or often enough. And to her, she said that gave her the interpretation that just God didn't care to hear her because she was praying. So that was really hard for her, and it felt like because God wasn't listening to her, there was no hope. So you can see how the person giving her that information, well, just pray, God will take it, just give it to God. These statements, were probably led by the heart, but the interpretation of it is so different than what was meant to be. Another client became suicidal because she was told that she should pray to God for forgiveness for her sexualized behaviors that she manifested while she was being trafficked. Sexual and labor trafficking was what this victim was involved in. Another client denounced her faith completely as she was told that God only gives us what we can handle and that God had a reason for putting her through her experiences. So some of us might have heard those sayings before. I know I have, not in this work, but I've heard it in church. I've seen it on Facebook, right? But this was told directly to the person. This caused her to believe that God was a horrible being that chose who to hurt and who to bless, and she turned towards Satanism, completely opposite of what this person was trying to do. But this is why. Because she thought, well, okay, if Christianity is saying this, and this is how their God is, and mean. God's mean, based on what they're telling me. So Google other religions. She came up to the satanic commandments. It's not called commandments. I can't remember exactly what the term was. The orders. That's what it is I have here. The orders. And the orders of Satan included not to harm children and to not force sexual acts on another. Those are two in the satanic orders that are listed. So she said, there's a religion that would have protected me instead of putting me through it. Okay? So can you imagine, like from these examples, how like the intention is to help heal through God by a lot of practices, yet we're not understanding how the brain's working and how meaning is being formed in the people that we're working with. And this hasn't been everybody. Some people have really found that faith has helped them through. But we need to understand where they are and let them bring that in. Okay? I don't know if there's another one here behind it. Nope, okay. All right, they have suggested a new diagnosis in the new Diagnostic Statistical Manual for complex PTSD because of the difference in emotional regulation, consciousness, self-perception. Those factors are different than PTSD, even chronic PTSD diagnoses. Shame and guilt might look different. I have an example here. I'll read it off here because it's smaller on that one. Okay, so I assigned a homework assignment to a teenager that had experienced significant complex trauma. Her assignment was to write in her journal about what it meant to her to feel real. She was dissociative, so that's like early on in her treatment. This was after a very meaningful discussion about her level of dissociation across positive and negative areas of her life. She couldn't feel love, she couldn't feel happy, she couldn't feel sad, she couldn't feel mad, she couldn't feel anything. So she had given me permission. She was one that wanted to come to trainings and be like, oh, help, and no. But she's like, well, yeah, I want them to know this. This is so important because all the other therapists and hospital staff and detectives and court advocates did not know this. I was like, okay, I'll share it. So I worked with her to compile it to make sure her privacy was still protected, but to give you this information. Okay, so this is her journal entry. Real, an anti-dissociation exercise is the title that she put in. I am real. I exist. Air is real and I breathe it. Flowers are real and they are beautiful. Art is real and its expression. Poetry is real and without it I would not be alive. Cats are real and I love them. Water is real and it makes up over 60% of the human body. My past is real and it is horrible, but it is over now. And I am things that are real. I am safe. My blanket fort is real and it is the safest place on earth. Rainbows are real and they are only light reflecting, but they are amazing. Thunder is real and it's scary, but it cannot hurt me. The color gray is real and it's my favorite color. Hills are real, and I don't need them to be complete anymore. The universe is real, and it's incomprehensibly real and large and filled with places we haven't even thought about yet. My feelings are real and valid, and there's nothing wrong with having them. Recovery is real, and it is possible. Music is real, and there is no limit to how much there is in the world. I am real. I endure. So with that, I learned a lot about her. I learned she was smart. I learned that she was expressive. I learned things she was interested in, like art and music. So I was able to incorporate that into her treatment process. I encouraged the incorporation of that into other conversations others were using to work with her. So like, oh, okay, all right, we're practicing for, court, and I can get a little anxious. Okay, so I heard that there was a song that you would play that you could breathe through and it would relax you. Want to play that right now? and being able to cross over into other areas with what she has shared with me. So I hope that helps to understand some of those different varieties. All right, so more about complex PTSD. There's distorted perceptions of the perpetrator. So in the beginning, you might have caught me as far as having some difficulty saying victim. I don't call somebody a victim. I don't call somebody a survivor. I don't call them anything. I call them their name that they want me to call them. I don't refer that they are a victim. I don't refer the trafficker or the pimp or whatever it is till I hear them define those roles. Then I'll use their definitions. I make my little notes and make sure that I'm following that definition. And if there's a change, sometimes there'll be a change, like my boyfriend might be what it starts with. Like, okay, boyfriend. So so your boyfriend and you met, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so your boyfriend, blah, 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 blah. And I would use that in working with them. And then, eventually, excuse my language, asshole said this, So I was like, okay, that's what we're calling them now. And it helps me to see their healing process and acceptance of where their perception is of themselves and their perpetrator. Relations with others include isolation, distrust, and or repeated search for a rescuer. So they might be somebody that tells everybody everything that happened and doesn't know that boundary, or they might not want to say anything. One's system of meanings may include a loss of sustaining faith or sense of hopelessness and despair. So I have another example that this was with somebody I had worked with. She said, I was told that the fact that I was sexually abused since I was 4 years old by various people was not my fault. I was told this by every therapist and every adult that was supposed to be there to help me. What did I hear when they told me this? It actually made me think that because so many of them were saying it, that they were trying to convince me it wasn't my fault because maybe it really was. So I was like, oh, okay. Didn't think about it that way. So we have to completely rethink a lot of stuff that we're like, okay, that whole thing with Robin Williams and Matt Damon, it's not your fault, it's not your fault, it's not your fault. It's so profound, right? But in reality, that might not be what that person needs to hear. So don't come out with these little slogans and sayings. Be real and genuine. Another person said, this is kind of thing that I was just mentioning earlier. I guess I did write it down. When I was little, I tried to get people to listen to me so they would know what was happening to me. So they would know I needed help. No one listened. So I started acting out. I decided that if they wouldn't hear me, they would certainly see me. They would not be able to ignore me if I was being difficult. So I was as difficult as I possibly could be. Those are her actual words. Okay. Then I have this picture. I encourage you that if you have some space in your office or whatever, to put up a picture similar to this one, or you can borrow this one if you want to copy and paste it or whatever. But I just have it sitting there, and it gets people to look. And I'm like, whoa, that's a weird tree. Yeah, what do you think about that? What do you think of when you see that picture? And that kind of tells me a little bit about their perception of the world and where they might be. So what do you see? So anybody want to name some things that they see when they look at that picture?
It bloomed where it wasn't planted.
What was that?
It bloomed where it wasn't planted.
It bloomed where it wasn't planted. What else?
It's uprooted.
Was somebody else or something?
No, I said it's uprooted.
It's
So,
uprooted.
Yeah, and on its way, probably going to die, maybe, if it doesn't
Okay,
happen.
all right, might be.
That little blue.
Yeah. All right, some people that have seen this picture have told me that that tree doesn't have any support, just like me. I don't have anybody to support me. This tree has one root going to the actual ground, if you can see that. It's unstable because of the root system. I've also had people say, that tree's resilient. It grew despite the fact that it has a big old hole underneath of it. It's finding a way to grow and heal despite the fact that it didn't have a good foundation, right? And then I like to point out the positives, especially if they hadn't seen the positives themselves, and then show, well, is there green on the tree? Yeah. What does that mean? That it's alive, right? It's living, despite everything else. But then we look at the roots. Okay, the roots that are going this way. What does that teach us? We need to reach out and grab onto healthy soil and sturdy resources that can help us to get past it. Okay, so who's your roots? So where do we need to put them? Where are some other networking like agencies and things that we can put in place to help you? You need more than just the one down in the ground, right? Because we don't want to have them attached to us too closely. We want them to be able to be sustaining without us eventually. Assessing with care. When you ask too many questions at once, you're going to get a shutdown, or you're going to get attitude, or you're going to get lies. You know, so plan those out. Plan those out carefully. Because it can re-traumatize the person when you're asking these questions. So you want to be sensitive to that. You have no idea what trigger words there might be for them in the beginning. You'll maybe learn them as you go, and usually you might learn them from making a mistake regarding them. We have no idea what any question does to them. We don't know about their boundaries, rapport, safety. Instead, use a collaborator, like I mentioned, as much as possible. I was asking you to do this for me, and I just completely took it over. So I was talking about collaborator, I thought of her. So just consider, that you might get different information each time you talk to them. Does that mean they lied? No. The brain, when it's in trauma mode, is going like this. And it can't cognitively process in a very clean and linear way. So it processes in little bits and across this situation to that situation. So it's going to take a while to get your full stories. Make sure, yep, okay. Tips for interviewing survivors. So again, I already mentioned some of this. When you introduce yourself, don't go too far into it. Just saying, hi, my name's Laura. I'm your therapist that, will be working with you. If you have any questions beyond that, feel free to let me know. Then when I'm asking questions, I'll ask them, do you have any questions for me? And I'll invite that and invite that and invite that. It's just to be that genuine. It's a relationship. Although it's a professional relationship, it is a relationship. Be mindful of your nonverbal communication. This one's hard for me because I am really genuine when I'm working with somebody, but sometimes I make faces, and I don't mean to. But when I hear something, I'm like, what? But from there, I use that as a opportunity. If you're flat, okay, they don't care, they're not reacting, they don't get it, right? But if you do react, then bring that in. If you find that you have reacted oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to have such a startled response, but what you shared just now, that was big. And it brought up something for me. Bring it back, okay? Above all else, make sure you do no harm. Don't give them shoulds. You should do this, you should do that. You shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that. Considerations for treatment. Again, ask why you do the work. Can your intention interrupt the therapeutic process? Well, how I've seen that in the therapy world is that, like, for instance, I have various certifications in different therapy models, right? And I like the therapy models that I use, which is what attracted me to them. But I can't be like, oh, I learned this activity, that's TFCBT, and I really want to try it on this person. They're not a mouse to experiment with. So you gotta avoid doing that. I mean, yes, as you learn these things with the trainings, awesome, but don't test it out on people, right? You can eventually take that first step to try things when it's appropriate to try it for the right reasons, which is for them, not for you just to see what it's like and because you think it's going to be fun. Okay. It's important to remember that a person does not fail therapy. So you might hear some therapists say that you might be partnering with, like, oh, well, we tried this, but they wouldn't do anything we asked them to do. They just failed everything we tried to teach them. No, we failed them. The therapist failed them because we were trying to shove them into a different box, right? So now the therapist role is more supposed to be, like, and I use metaphor a lot, kind of like Lowe's, okay? So the person comes into Lowe's and says, I'm hearing this weird noise under my sink. I don't know what it is. The person at Lowe's says, well, it might be this. You'll find this down aisle 8. Okay, you go get it, take it home, try it out, and you come back, still making the noise. That didn't work. Oh, okay, tell me more about what didn't work about it, or what you hear now. Oh, okay, well that might be, still down aisle 8, but down a little bit further over by this. Okay, that's what therapy should look like. So, giving what is probably the best case option to start with, and then getting that feedback. And then staying like, well, you just didn't do it right. No. You didn't pray hard enough. No. Say, okay, it didn't work. Tell me what happened. And then what part of it was the part that really made it not work. And then your job as a therapist is to assign something that does work or something else. So make sure that when you're partnering with therapists, they're not so arrogant in their ways, to be humble for the best interest of the client. Okay? Recommended treatment modalities for complex trauma. And again, I'm telling you all this just because if you're not a therapist, which I know the majority of you all in here aren't, you will be partnering with them. Okay, so know what to look for if you're making the referral to somebody. You're going to want to refer to somebody who has attachment type therapy models that are experientially based, because again, cognitively, they're not going to be able to process things clearly and organized. So CBT and trauma-focused CBT does not work for complex trauma until somebody has become past that part of their crisis and is beyond the dissociation, and then you can incorporate some CBT and TFCBT and things like that is using this part of the brain. But you want to be hands-on to start with and use more than one of the 5 senses. In your settings, even if it's not mental health, you can do this too by having things available like on your desk or whatever that can incorporate the 5 senses. I brought this little thing here just to show you. I got this at Dollar General. It's that magnetic sand or kinetic sand, right? And you can put it just like in a little bowl. No matter the age, people play with it. And they feel it, right? So they're getting the texture of it, and they're looking at how it falls apart and what they form with it. So it's looking at sight and feeling. They like it, no matter the age. One of those little Zen gardens with a ray, something you could do. I have other little fidget things, and again, it's not just for children. The adults use this stuff just as much as the kids do. A little jar with some candies in it, like some peppermints that are individually wrapped for sanitary reasons, but just as an invitation for them to be able to use taste if they need to do that. So being able to incorporate those five senses, diffusers, things that smell good in your office, not too strong of a smell, okay, but just something light and everything that they can, when they're breathing, because it's going to be stressful, this whole process, no matter what side of the process you're on. So consider all that. So then, again, attachment theory based, such as I do a lot with animal-assisted therapies, but there's other attachment-based models. The animals, for me, help to, if somebody likes animals, some people are scared of them, so it might not be appropriate for everybody, but I do have a therapy dog, and I have therapy horses that are not ridden, it's all ground-based, so the power control, the boundaries and all that is all explored. And I also have a cat that I got to be as a mouser. Her name's Alice. And when you have horses, you have hay, and you can have mice, right? So I got her for that, but I swear that, I almost like I could read her mind, that she's just like looking at the dog. She's like, that's a therapy dog, and it's getting pet all the time by everybody that comes in here. Those big things out back are getting a lot of attention because they're therapy horses. I'm not a mouser, I'm a therapy cat. So she involves herself in every outdoor session that we have. So Alice is like, sometimes she'll jump on the back of the horse if a client's brushing a horse because she's like, don't forget me. She just involves herself. But the clients really love her because they love the fact that she defined herself, first of all, because that tells them they can, right? And then it also helps them feel chosen. Like she came from all the way down there, like 3 acres away, to come to be with me right now. And that feels good. Where the dogs, dogs will love everybody, unconditionally, unconditionally. The horses might wander away, if they just don't feel comfortable or someone's anxiety is a little bit too much for them. They'd be like, I don't know about that person right now. But the cat, she's always right there. So think about, if that's an option. I have checked to see if in North Carolina if dogs would be allowed into courtrooms, and at this point they're not. However, I'd like to see that change because I've been able to have Lily, my therapy dog, go to the Children's Advocacy Centers with some of the clients that I work with when they're sharing their forensic information. Not to be in there in the room with them, but if the child needed a break, I'd be out in the waiting room with Lily, and they'd come, and I just needed to rub on Lily and smell her for a minute. Okay, and they're like, okay, I'm ready to talk more. And then going back into the room with a forensic interviewer. So you can think about how that might work. Expressive art treatments are hands-on, such as art therapy, music therapy, drama therapy, narrative therapy. I'm about to start hip-hop therapy with a group of girls that have experienced human trafficking that are all in their teenage years. Because dance was something that for me, as a complex trauma survivor, was something that really helped me not only feel control of my body, but to be able to, be outward and celebrate and fun with it. So it's hip-hop therapy, we're starting that. Experiential therapies such as mindfulness, nature-based therapies, being outdoors, adventure-based therapies. Sometimes the only time someone who's dissociating can feel something is when they're putting themselves in some sort of risk. So one thing I'd like to develop at my site is like a low ropes course or something, not a high one, but a low ropes course. And the courses sometimes give them that too, where they can feel that adrenaline, so they can get that in a safe way instead of finding a high or risky sex or something else that could put them back in danger. And then the equine assisted therapy has been very powerful for those that have come to our site for that. When good intentions aren't enough. So we mentioned some of this a little bit with the faith-based NGOs and the exploitation and the unnecessary use of power and control. I don't know if I talked about that one as much. Unnecessary use of power and control might be like when I saw this, luckily it isn't in existence anymore, but that the young lady staying at this one shelter had to sell so many Bibles in a day so that way they could stay the next night. So luckily they're not in practice anymore. But that power and control, or like, no, you're not allowed to have access to the internet. No, you're not allowed to call so-and-so. You know, you have to have safety measures. We have to really assess, like, bless you, what I can control, what I should control, what I can't control and shouldn't control. Because we need to help them be empowered. Remember that, like, number 3 slide or whatever? I always want to make sure that's being considered. Gender identification and sexuality is another thing that I've had people come to me and they felt really, really shamed for. That's not my place to invite any opinions into that. I love everybody that comes to my door. I don't know one person that comes to my door. You know, and then when I've heard, you know, like, well, they couldn't help me because of my sexuality, and they said it was wrong, and I wasn't going to do the gender, whatever, I can't even term of it off the end, where they kind of force the heterosexuality, and you know, they called me a prostitute, but I was trafficked, things like that, where I've been able to get past it, but it takes me a long time to get past it. But one young lady said to me, she's like, and that didn't make sense. They said that they were religious, but didn't Jesus walk with a prostitute? I was like, yes, yes he did. You know, it's like, yeah, we need to love everybody and be there for everybody and not make those judgments, no matter what your personal belief is about things. Can you imagine how confused somebody might feel if they have been sexually exploited in every way, shape, and form? You know, they might think they're, you know, like really like, oh, I don't know, like I'm asexual, you know, nothing, or everybody, you know, they don't know, but that's such an important dynamic, and sometimes they do know. Sometimes, you know, what I've found, especially with the males that I've worked with that have been sex trafficked, is that they had come out to their family as gay and were kicked out and had nowhere to go. Trafficker swooped up that vulnerability and went with it. So we've got to be really careful about that. So what can we do then? Again, clean language, clean paperwork, clean environment. When I say clean, it's not like tidy. I'm not saying like don't say cuss words. It's about not putting labels or definitions on anything. Internal audit, external consultations. When I do work with other agencies, you know, any feedback, you know, like, hey, have you heard how they thought it went? You know, so they might not tell me directly, but I want to make sure that if they felt uncomfortable about something, that I know what it is so I can fix it. Constant check-ins with the people that you're working with, client controlled, have them be as empowered as possible in a situation. Think outside the box, not just within it. Sometimes the answers are within a box, but most of the time it's going to be outside of it. Abolish the assumptions and understand that what fits for one does not fit for everybody, no matter what it is, no matter how wonderful it is. Healing for someone with complex trauma is not linear, and that was that statement that one young lady liked. The victim-centered approach, again, this is just a summary of what we've already talked about, just a slide to kind of gather that for you, and making sure you're taking care of you. And this is one thing that I usually do share with the people I work with, is that, hey, I know counseling can feel really awkward and uncomfortable and it's hard. Well, how do you know that? Well, because I go to counseling every month. And I see a therapist, and she helps me with stress reduction, or if something's going on in my life, because I need to be good and my best so I can be better for you, right? Help yourselves. Don't feel like that's selfish. If your way of helping yourself is getting your nails done, ladies or men, get them done, right? If your way, and this is sometimes mine, is driving up to the top of Morrow Mountain State Park is near me. Drive up to the top of the state park, look out, and say, it is a beautiful world. And all the evil I just heard about is not the world. It's just what I had in my office at that moment. Do what you have to do for you. Make sure you have a personal life. Don't just have connections that are work-related outside of work. know that this type of job that you all have is part of who you are, right? But make sure you remember who else you are. Having the organizational piece be organized and intentional, and make sure that you consider, again, in general, just taking care of yourself, kind of like I have on there the oxygen mask and life preserver metaphors. Quickly, in case you hadn't heard them, oxygen mask when you're on a plane, they tell you to put your oxygen mask on first before you help somebody with theirs, okay? That's because if you don't get yours on in time, you might pass out, you won't be able to help anybody. So that, or the life preserver, if you see somebody drowning, don't just jump in with them, grab that life preserver, and then go, thinking of your own safety as well as theirs. A warning system scale, you can kind of look at to see like, okay, 1 is the best I've ever felt, and 10 is kind of like, all right, I am not returning any phone calls, I am not feeling like getting out of my bed, I just can't face the day. You know, that's a 10, you know, and just see where you are, and if you start trickling up towards that, give yourself a mental health day, whatever that might look like. I wanted to put 10 steps to prevent burnout. Your environment, your work environment is really important too. So one thing that we've done, which we're silly at my office. When there's clients in there, we're silly when it's appropriate. When there's not clients in there, you know, sometimes I'm like, okay, I saw everyone's calendars. I know who you saw today, and I know the heaviness of what was brought in. So I heard about this thing called the Get Up Challenge. Let's all figure out what that is, and let's learn that dance real quick. So, you know, we just all laugh and get together and do something. It could look like bringing in a meal on Fridays. You know, it could look so many different ways. But take care of each other and bring in that non-work aspect into work when it's appropriate. As long as you're being professional, right? And then this is a picture of me with saffron and what I usually wear at work. Something like that, not like this. You know, I might have my Red Sox hat on because I am from Massachusetts, a t-shirt or just a regular shirt, jeans, right, boots, because I'm able to relate to them and they're able to relate to me without me setting up that power differential. So just think about what you can do at your settings, what you can't do. Okay, well, how can you make it a little bit more sensitive? And then as you're, you know, reaching out to other resources, you know, checking in and making sure they're doing it too. Because if they're not, you might not want to partner with them until they do, and you can try to help them to put things into place. Like at Stanley Regional Medical Center, there was a problem that one person told me that they had to tell what was going on with them 8 times before they saw a doctor, but they left before they saw the doctor because they were tired of telling about their husband beating them up. So they're like, by the time I finish telling the doctor, he's supposed to show up here. I'm out of here. So, you know, then from there, I was able to go to Stanley and not be like, hey, you did this wrong. But I was able to say, hey, let's see if we can brainstorm about this. You know, is there a way when somebody comes in with something traumatic that they can skip some of the steps between this and the doctor? How can we make that happen? I was able to put in some new protocols into place. A lot of times people will be receptive to that. I really think we need to remember to believe that we want to all help the people, but we might just make assumptions and just not consider because maybe we've never been in that position before. Or maybe it's a completely new person that's telling you, hey, I like that you don't have a thing on your wall. Oh, you know, listen to what you hear and share it with other people so we can all do better. Don't keep it to yourself because you're not going to be able to handle everyone by yourself. Network. That's on my part. I don't know if there's any specific questions. I know I have help here in case your questions aren't within the area of my expertise. And I do want to say that that's another part of being genuine and human, is being able to say, I don't know the answer to that one, but I can find out. Don't be too proud. So I have some others up here with me to help me answer questions. So are there any that you can think of now that you would like answered? Oh, yes.
Can you drill down a little bit more on the concept of using clean language? And the reason I say it is because several weeks or months ago, you and I had a conversation that I really benefited from. In my years of working with survivors, I found that I had developed a language that I would use when working with them based on my experiences with other clients in a way to connect with them. So using language I'd learned, knowing, and a lot of times I perceived it to be successful because they would say, oh, she knows what I dealt with.
Right.
But through learning from you, I realized that probably wasn't the most trauma-informed approach. So could you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, and I usually start with a disclosure when I'm introducing myself to people I'm working with by saying, just my name, but a little bit like, I've been doing this work for a while. However, I understand that what I may have learned from others might be very different for you. Although I am somebody that has experienced complex traumas myself, I'm not going to assume that how you feel about things that might be the same things I've experienced are how you feel as well. If I ever say anything that sounds like an assumption, please call me on that. So I invite that first because having clean language is really hard to maintain. But if you do your best and then have them know that if you say something that's not exactly what it is, they can say, oh wait, no, let me correct that. And knowing that they can be comfortable in doing that is a really good step.
But then is it safe, after you mentioned this a little bit before, if they identify someone as a pimp or they refer to a trap house or bottom bitch, you then have permission to use that same language, so it's not harmful thereafter?
Right.
Okay.
And I'll use an example like in play therapy, okay? This is what helped me with clean language was play therapy. And equine therapy kind of has the same model. It's very non-directive, okay? So in play therapy, if a child is playing with toys, you don't say, oh, I see that you picked up the T-Rex, and put it over here. You say, oh, now you're picking that up and putting it over here. And the child one time said, yeah, that's daddy. If I would have said, oh, you're moving the T-Rex over here, I may never have heard daddy, right? So staying as basic with your language, you're all very educated people in this room, and sometimes we can get caught up in terms that we've learned. And if we just bring it down, not dumb it down, because nothing dumb about it, it's very intelligent to make yourself very easily understood without as many communication errors that could happen, right? No matter how smart someone else is that's with you, communication's hard. So as basic as you can get with no definition, like, all right, saw this, so this person said this to you, don't define, just very general. And again, if you accidentally make an assumption, that relationship as it's built, they'll be able to feel more comfortable challenging that. No, that wasn't so-and-so. It was, that's what I call him. There was a young lady that I worked with that called her father his first name, did not call him dad. So anytime I referred to him, I had to use his first name instead of saying your dad. Because if I did that, I'm forcing something and a meaning to her that isn't mine to make. So we have to be really careful about that. Yes?
Do you have any examples of things that you've heard from clients that were either helpful or hurtful, specifically in the context of an attorney-client relationship?
Yes. And some of it I don't feel like could have been avoided. It's a very vulnerable position to be, working with an attorney to prosecute somebody, that has harmed you. It's very scary, and the trust is difficult, but there's a process that has to be pretty fast, right? in the legal field. So what I've heard was things like, well, you know, they just asked a lot of questions. They kept asking me over and over. It made me think like they didn't believe me, you know, and I'm like, well, you know, so what I try to do on my side is to prepare them. Oh, you're going to be meeting with an attorney. They're going to ask you a lot of questions. Some are going to be the same question over and over and over again. The reason that they do that is to make sure that there's not another little bit of information that you forgot to mention this time that they can include to help build up your case, you know, to be stronger. And then having that relationship with the attorneys helps me to be able to say, okay, you know, because I'm building up strong witnesses, right? That's not my purpose, but if somebody's able to say, yes, this is what happened, this is when it happened, this is how it happened, this is who did this, and be able to be real linear with it, that's success. But a lot of times that's an expectation early on that attorneys have that have been communicated to me anyway, and somebody with complex trauma, they're like all over the place. And then it might look like your notes might like have arrows, you know, from one thing to the next in order to make sense of it. So then what I would recommend from an attorney standpoint is to read back. Like, okay, let me read back what I have so far. Let me know if I missed anything. Okay, I'm gonna read back again, just because I wanna make sure I'm doing the best possible job for you. Read it again. And that's something that you can get past it. But basically, it's, from what I've mostly heard has been things that you can't really change because of the job that you have. But the sensitivity involved that you can do, you know, will make it easier. And helping them feel like a person, looking at them in the eyes, you know, not be like, oh, that attorney lady had a Gucci suit on, and she had this and she had that. I'm just $1 to her. I know it, right? So just keep in mind, like, okay, you know, this dynamic, the power, you know, how you sit, where you sit, you know, things like that can make that get kind of cross over that relationship. Any other things that you have to add with that?
Yes,
I
I
heard
did. I'm not sure if it's for me.
Yeah.
I did want to add, there was one client that I worked with after she worked with Laura. Most of the relationship that I have with Laura is me sending clients to her. But the client that I did work with that I met after Laura met her told me that Laura was the first therapist she'd ever worked with that allowed her to lead the therapy session, that allowed her to do activities during the session like working with animals, working with the horses, and working with the dogs. And I worked with her for a couple of months afterwards, and she unfortunately had to move to a different county. But the one thing she always told me to look for is a therapist that was just like Laura. And the attachment theory modalities that Laura uses are not commonly used with therapists that I have worked with in the past. And I just want to stress the importance of looking at the relationship with your client from that lens, not so much, you know, the client-attorney relationship and just person-to-person relationship, because that's really what I've seen my clients value, and I've really seen them build a trust with the members of authority that they've worked with when they have this person-to-person relationship and not so much a therapist to client relationship or a doctor to patient relationship or a client to attorney relationship.
Exactly, and you know, with that, you know, that you have to always remember that that other person is part of that relationship. You know, sometimes we're like, okay, this is my client. Even some of the terms, no, I'm meeting with another person, you know. But you can have things like with the magnetic sand or some of those adult coloring things to have, you know, in place when you're asking these questions that are hard that you need to ask. You can have things there that can kind of help buffer a little bit and pause when you notice, you know, that they're starting to speak faster or you hear a little shake in the voice, or like, okay, let's slow down for a minute. You know, let's talk about this or that, something like, I noticed that you're, you know, coloring that, you know, do you like art? You know, whatever, just something completely generic, and then come back. So being able to just really be with a person, sense where they are, and that's something you will improve on as you practice it, but something that we have to be mindful of, not just what we have to get. And that's where I was talking about, like, the information you have to get versus client-centered. So how can you do both? And it is a difference. And you might mess up, and sometimes I'm like, ooh, okay, I have to ask this question. It's not a question that, you know, I feel comfortable even asking you because I know it's going to be difficult to answer. I'm going to ask it and throw it out there and throw back at me whatever you want, you know, and just be, you know, generic and genuine in that process.
And at the hospital, we recently started working with a program called Arts for Life to have art and music therapy in the hospital, and we also have aromatherapy. We have pet therapy, and we're actually going to start doing yoga therapy soon. And we found that since we started incorporating these other activities, we're having much less incidents of violence on the unit or poor relationships between the patient and staff. And we still have a long ways to go, but we have found that adding these modalities have truly helped the patient experience.
I was gonna add,
Yeah.
kind of, if the attorney has to kind of meet the client outside of work, where would kind of the best suggestion to be in case that workspace didn't add to the scope of kind of having something there that they can have, magnetic, or something that was as common, where would kind of the best place to be?
What I would first start with is asking where they're most comfortable. Like, okay, you know, where would you be most comfortable for us to meet? We could meet at the office, I could come to you in the shelter, or I could, you know, we could do this, but you also have to think safety, right? So you can't suggest something that would be unsafe for you or them. So you don't want to offer to come to their house, just because you can't control what might come there or not. So, you know, like, well, you know, let's meet somewhere, you know, out, away from your house. You know, if you want to meet at our office, that's great. If you want to meet somewhere else, don't do it somewhere that can't provide confidentiality, like Burger King or something, you know, but you can meet at a library. A lot of libraries have like private little reading rooms. So somewhere like that is a possibility. I've you know, heard a lot of different options that people have used. But asking where they're comfortable. Because if they're not comfortable, then they're not going to talk to you.
Also get past that lack of self-preservation. If you're speaking with the client and you notice that or something like that comes up and you're wanting to go back to the trauma, how do you get past that? Kind of works that way.
That's a delicate process because you don't want to do that too soon. You don't want to challenge their decisions too soon, but along the relationship you can. And for me, you know, I could use an example for myself as I learned self-preservation. That was a way that I was challenged, was that it was when I was getting training about the equine therapy, and I was told, okay, here's a round pen, here's a Mustang horse that just came out of the wild 2 weeks ago. We worked with him for a couple days, but he doesn't know anything yet. So we want you to go in there with him and, you know, have him run around circles around you and then have him follow you. And I'm like, okay, because it was an attachment-detachment practice, okay? So I walk in there, and I'm not a horse expert. I just recognize the power of horses, so I've learned about them, so I could utilize them in therapy, but they're beautiful animals. And so I stepped in to the round pen, and I was like, okay, and there's this collection of ropes and whips and all kinds of things over here, and I'm like, this poor animal has just come out of the wilderness, and he's probably scared to death. I'm not going to use any of this stuff because it's going to make him more scared. So I walked up to him. I was like, come on, boy, come on, boy, come on, boy. I was like, no, okay, well, maybe if I go more towards his backside and closer, come on, get going, move. Because I thought, all right, I saw some other people, you know, kind of like position themselves, so I kind of watched. But then I got so close to him by his hind quarters that the lady called me up and she said, stop for a second, come here. I was like, what is it? She's like, what were you doing? I said, I was trying to get the horse to move. She's like, well, why didn't you use any of the tools? I was like, well, because I didn't want to scare him. And so she's like, well, did you realize you were in the kick zone? It's like, no, I didn't. That was lack of self-preservation. I wasn't aware. She's like, do you often put yourself in harm's way to help others? Yes, I do. So it was a matter of like oh, so, but I, of course, was, already way past my trauma. But I keep that in the back of my mind as far as like, well, how can you gently show like there should be a red flag waving right there, So that's a delicate dance. You don't want to challenge too soon because then they're going to defend. So, yeah.
Personally, the way that I navigate that is asking the client to define safety and then making sure that they're given resources to meet their goals for safety and then planting seeds along the way.